So before we get into the debates, I'm going to quickly go ahead and answer his thing, or I guess prove him wrong. So does hate speech exist? Well, first we need to find what hate speech is. So let's go ahead and look that up. Okay, so according to Google, hate speech is defined as abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice on the basis of ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or similar grounds. Okay, so does that exist? Yes, it does. And we know that because I could literally go do that right now. It absolutely exists. How is this an argument? So after watching the entire video to figure out how he could possibly think it doesn't exist, I've realized that he seems to be utterly confused about what existence means. From what I can tell, he thinks that for something to exist, it needs to be legally defined somewhere in the Constitution, and hate speech is not. Therefore, it must not exist. Even though gravity is not defined in the Constitution, it still exists. The Earth isn't defined in the Constitution, and it exists. The universe, existence itself, none of that is defined in the Constitution, yet it all exists. Things can exist without being legally defined. So the first person he talks to, even though they disagree in the beginning, they end up having a pretty nice conversation and can find some common ground on a few things until these two other people walk up, where the conversation gets turned back onto hate speech and whether or not it exists. Here's what he says.
But hate speech, right? What is hate speech? What's the legally defined term? What does it mean?
I don't know, you tell me.
It doesn't exist.
I don't know if it doesn't have a legally defined term.
It does in my country of Canada or in Europe, where you can be jailed for saying offensive things, but in the States, the First Amendment protects against that.
I see. So it doesn't exist, but in Canada, it is legally defined. How can you be jailed for doing something that doesn't exist? He never ends up answering that, and neither does anyone else. Overall, this first conversation with these people is not super interesting. They just sort of talk about it, and they go on side conversations, whatnot. But what I really want to talk about is the next conversation. So this next one is pretty funny because as you listen to them, if you're actually listening to what they're saying, it's pretty easy to tell that they're not actually listening to each other. So to make things more obvious and clear, I'm going to sort of mark down what each of them is saying and how the other one is interpreting it. Here we go.
See, that was nice. Not everyone's this guy.
Imagine we change the First Amendment,
Yeah,
and then we pass a law saying that X behavior is hate speech.
right.
Is it now hate speech?
That would be a violation of human rights, and I wouldn't support it. Thank God there's no law like that exists.
That's wonderful. Imagine that we did it.
But here's the thing,
Imagine that we did it.
I just answered your question.
I'm here
Imagine
to
that we
talk to
did it.
people
Imagine
and
that
tell
we
them
did
that
it.
hate speech isn't a thing because there's no legal definition of it.
Right.
I'm saying imagine if there was a legal definition
Yes.
of it.
Yeah. I would
Would
be
it then be hate speech?
no, it would be a violation of human rights, and I
That's
wouldn't
wonderful.
support it.
Okay, so we have Guy 1 and Guy 2. Guy 2 is essentially trying to make Guy 1 understand that hate speech exists without a law by posing a hypothetical where if hate speech was legally defined, then somehow it would start existing, which doesn't make sense. Guy 1 is interpreting this argument as Guy 2 saying that we should change the Constitution to legally define and ban hate speech. And he's arguing that that would be a violation of human rights and we should not do that.
I agree it's a violation of human rights.
Okay, so
Would
you
it
don't
now
support
be
hate speech laws.
I do.
Okay.
I'm hearing you say that whether or not something is hate speech hinges on whether or not it's legally defined.
No. What I'm saying is, yes,
And I
first
don't want to hear you tell me that there is not a legal
there is no
definition of
legal
hate speech.
definition of hate speech in the United
That's
States,
irrelevant
and
then.
freedom of speech
So
is a
what?
fundamental human right.
Then he goes on talking about how freedom of speech is a fundamental human right, which it absolutely is. And the second guy is just saying that even though it is a fundamental human right, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't even if free speech is a fundamental human right, hate speech still exists.
So what?
So the only world in which hate speech would be defined, correct me if I'm wrong, you're drawing a hypothetical, you've ignored the reality of where we are now.
Hate
Let me finish my
speech
phrase.
exists without a law.
Let me-
You run up and call someone a nigger, that's hate speech.
First
dude.
off, I wouldn't
You
use
know
that
what
language,
you're
you could be
referring
fined for
to.
hate speech.
And it cuts off there, so we don't really get to see the rest of the interaction. To be clear, I understand that he's not genuinely saying that he thinks hate speech doesn't exist. However, that is what his sign says. What are people supposed to think about that? Are they supposed to assume that you're saying that we should not ban hate speech because it's a fundamental human right? Look at your sign. Why is it up to everyone else to assume that you're smarter than you're acting? Hope you found this video enlightening. If you disagree, make sure to leave a comment telling me, why I'm wrong. Anyway, have a good day.